Welcome to our Urban Legends podcast. I'm Dr. Gloria McDaniel Hall. I've been a teacher, a principal, and assistant superintendent, all within urban schools in Chicago and around the country. Our Urban Legends podcast is a forum for sharing ideas, strategizing together, and supporting each other as we dismantle the deficit narratives sometimes associated with urban education and discuss where and how amazing work is being done. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment. This is a very, very, very special installment of the Urban Legends podcast because I am joined by none other than Mrs. Sylvia Peters, who, you know that I work at National Louis. Well, Sylvia Peters went to National Louis and actually graduated in 1959. So she has quickly become one of my idols. I had the opportunity to hear about her at our yearly professional development, and then I had the opportunity to talk to her, and I knew that I had to interview her on the podcast. So I'm so excited. She truly is an urban legend. She is a legend in my own time, and once you hear from her, you'll know why I feel like that. So, Miss Sylvia, welcome, welcome, welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about your journey in education. Now, I know that is a lot of years. So I said, pick three, after you tell us about your journey and about your time in National Louis, three major highlights from your life kind of in this work.
Well, I'm so excited to meet you, Dr. McDaniel. I'm so excited that you are at National because when I went to National College of Education and arrived on campus in 1955, there were maybe 8 African American students out of maybe 1,500 students. It was a small, well-heeled girls' school. And I went to National because there was a great admissions director there, Dayton Graffman, and he played the piano and he believed in diversity, and he made sure that I was able to come to National College of Education and stay in the dormitory. And at the time that I stayed in the dormitory, there were maybe 250 women from all over the world, all over the world. They came from Iran, they came from Africa, they came from everywhere, but not many African Americans. We called ourselves Negroes in those days, and not very many Negroes. In fact, at the time that I lived in the dormitory, there were 2 Negroes. I was one of them. And it was an extraordinary experience for me. I was raised in a family of educators. My aunt went to the University of Chicago, and Thomas Dewey was one of her professors. So I grew up in a household where the prevailing philosophy was that the grandchildren learned by doing. And we had a playroom downstairs where we were given all kinds of blocks and building toys and things like that. And we gardened and did all kinds of things. So I had a very hands-on kind of childhood. And I landed at National, and it was just a modern day miracle to me because my parents were musicians. There was lots of liberal arts. The liberal arts at National in those days was deeply profound. And there was a history professor there, Dr. Marquardt, who was the bursar too. And he believed in the emerging nations of Africa, Ghana, and those places. And he would talk to me often about the power of Africa and the power of being a Negro going into education from Chicago. And he used to stay on my case about doing things. He knew I was a good history student, but in those days, the professors just embraced the students. And so one of the profound things that made a difference in my life as an educator, first of all, was going to national and having that serious, uh, over the top, diverse liberal arts education. We did everything. We had to make uh, things, boxes that would float on water. We made wooden bowls. We we had a dance group. We had a little orchestra. We had choirs. We had all kinds of things. And at the time, students from Northwestern University used to come to National for education courses. And I didn't realize it, but now I know that National was one of the top teacher development schools in the nation.
That's what I
And
heard, like in the top 3.
yes, it
That's
was
amazing.
right, right. It was really, really, really good. And I uh, I thrived there because I was a dancer, and um, I had gone to an urban school, Parker High School in Chicago, and they had a teachers training school there, Chicago Teachers College, and I had a sister and a brother who had graduated from Chicago Teachers College, and then another sister who graduated from George Williams, and she was a physical education teacher. And I had three aunts that taught in the Chicago public schools. So I was kind of geared to be a teacher, although I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to be an architect. And I couldn't take architectural classes because women were not allowed to be in the drafting courses in those days. So I think the first thing that happened to me in terms of my educational career was that I went to National, where creativity was the thing of the day. The other thing that we did at National, you really learned by doing things. There was a demonstration school, and the professors knew the first week of school if you were teaching material. Because one of the things that I've found that has deeply shaped my attitude about education is that you have to love the children. You have to love the children, you have to love the parents, and you have to have a great amount of respect for those whom you are serving. I always felt that I was there to be a servant leader before servant leadership became popular, because I was a child that had attended public schools in Chicago, and I remained silent because no one ever really saw me because of my color and all those kinds of things. And so I was a quiet, nice Negro child. I didn't rock the boat. I never got one check when I went through 12 years of school. I was like a little speck on the wall, and I observed everything that everyone did. When I came to National, I was liberated. And the racism was subtle. I never had a roommate until I was a senior in the dormitory, and I roomed with three other girls because they were remodeling the dorm and they just didn't have any
No
single
space.
rooms. So I
Okay.
had a single room for 7 semesters and finally ended up rooming with some girls from New York and places like that. But it was a very rich space. The second thing that shaped my life is that I taught in some very important schools in Chicago. I worked at Richard E. Byrd, which was a closed circuit television school. And we had closed circuit television, and we piped out educational programs to 8 schools in the community of Cabrini Green. And I was a kindergarten teacher. And a white man was going to start teaching Negro history um, in the 60s, the early 60s. And he got a job, another job, before the summer program began, where we used to make the tapes. And the job that he received right at the last moment, paid $1 more an hour than he would have received working on closed circuit television. And I was tapped to teach Negro history because I was a safe person.
Mm.
In those days, I wore lovely little petticoats and long skirts and gloves to school. That's the way you went dressed to teach school. You couldn't wear trousers or pants or any of these kind of work clothes that people wear now. You went to school dressed as a professional. And so I was a safe person. And you know what happened? I became radicalized that summer.
Nice.
I started getting into this business of Negro history, and in those days, Lerone Bennett was working on Up from Slavery. John Hope Franklin was his great professor at the University of Chicago, and I just went for it. I invited them all into this studio, and we created some great programs. And I became a person who walked the picket lines and was a follower of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I also got a fro. My father was
Oh,
so upset. He said,
yes.
I thought that I had raised a beautiful young woman, and here you're running around with a fro. But it was deeply profound. And I got into Black history, Black art, Black poetry, everything that I could possibly bring to these students. And in a sense, almost started a Black revolution over in Cabrini Green. It was fabulous. And I wouldn't have had the courage if I hadn't gone to National and had performed in plays. We used to put plays on at National, and I was in all of the plays and danced and everything. So closed circuit television was a piece of cake for me. I also, we had to do a lot of research. We had to do our own research, our own writing of scripts, and you learned a lot. I learned to speak network English, presenting those television scripts that I wrote myself. The first time I heard myself speak, it was a shock. And then I said, oh no, I've got to do better
I
than
gotta
this.
get better.
So I did that. And in those 7 or 8 schools, we had everything going on. We had Black history programs, we had Black art shows. I had the great muralist coming over to our school, and we had murals on the buildings up and down the street where Richard E. Byrd was, and Richard Hunt did a cross in one of the churches there and a cross out in the yard. It was just a beautiful community. And then the second school that I went to work was Walt Disney Magnet School. And at Walt Disney Magnet School, in order to be accepted, you had to go through a battery of examinations.
Wow.
You had to write an essay, you had to demonstrate that you could teach. Um, and they weren't interested particularly in how much knowledge you had. They were interested in how many positive interactions you had with the students.
Mm.
So you learned a lot about, um, um, and they had an instrument that they made. It was called the Oscar, and they could record whether the the interactions with that you had with the students were really and truly positive ones, or just kind of like this fake business. I love you, honey.
Right, right,
That didn't get
right.
it with them. And then they also measured how many times you went up and down Bloom's taxonomy and Piaget. You had to know what you were doing. Um, and teaching was an art and a science and everything else, the creative business they wanted to know. So I went to work at Walt Disney Magnet School, and at the time I went there weren't very many African American teachers, but there was this very unusual principal. I hope that she's still alive. She was very young. Her name was Dr. Lorraine Levine.
Hmm.
And When I went there to teach, I was also elected by my peers to be uh, a unit leader of a team of 10 teachers. And that was where I learned how to develop curriculum, implement it, and make sure that children achieved. And Dr. Levine encouraged me to be a creative person. She would come and look at everyone teach. And I remember the first time that she came in and saw me teaching, I had no idea she was coming, and I was teaching something about similes and just carrying on with these kids. She went back to the entire staff and she said, I want you all to be able to go in and see this woman teach similes to children that we don't expect to know similes. And I just, I blossomed as an educational leader. I blossomed as a collaborative person. We did some of the craziest things that I've ever done. We would throw out the curriculum and rewrite it. Our school was right across from Lake Michigan, so I remember us writing a curriculum on water. Now this was back in the late 60s and 70s that I
Right.
went to this school, and talking about water and saving the earth and all this kind of, this was all relatively new,
New.
but we just jumped right into it. And one year we took the children to the underbelly of O'Hare Field, not the upper part, the
Yep, yep,
underbelly,
yep.
where people do the work. And we were there, and I looked and I saw a poster down in the employees uh, restaurant that said, "Come to Disney World." And our school was named Walt Disney Magnet School. And Walt Disney himself, even though he was notable and everything, was not too happy with Black people.
Oh,
And I decided we need to go there. So we threw out the curriculum, rewrote the curriculum, and took 200 children and their parents on Delta Airlines and flew off to Disney World. And we did that 2 years in a row. And it was just, people were like, you are insane. And we got all of this wherewithal and everything to help us out. I would put on, with our team, we would put on Hansel and Gretel. We rewrote the book, The Red Velveteen Rabbit, and we put that play on. We did things from all kinds of musicals, Porgy and Bess, just everything we could think of. And the kids were integrated by age. Our kids were, when we started with them, they were 5, 6, 7, and 8, and the parents wanted us to continue. So we taught those kids through 5th grade. And it was multi-aged, it was diverse. Children were selected by computer, and they balanced out teams of teachers so that children saw diversity. Every evening, 56 buses would pull up and pack these children on and take them all over half of the city of Chicago. So it was an extraordinary experience. And then we got some new leadership, and I was unhappy, and I quit teaching. And this person who was the leader told me, you can't afford to stop teaching. And I said, watch me. And my husband said, he told you that? You can do anything you want to.
that's
I,
what I'm talking
I
about.
took a $12,000 pay cut, and I went to work for SRA IBM as a consultant salesperson. And that experience, I was there 3 years, taught me so much. Computers were being invented there. The PC came out. During the very first few months that I arrived at IBM SRA, PCs came out. So I had a PC and an Atari in my kitchen. And my attitude was, I'm going to learn to use you or I'm going to break you. Neither one of them ever broke. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about testing. I learned a lot about the implementation of direct instruction reading. I used to go down to the University of Chicago and meet with the authors, not the University of Chicago, University of Illinois.
Illinois.
I would go and meet with Elaine Bruner and all those people down there. I knew Ziggy Engelman, just like we were all very good friends. And I worked, I led the country 2 years in a row because I learned how to set up my own business. I became an entrepreneur. I would get out in the streets at 6 o'clock in the morning. My husband would have to pull me out of a car at 6 o'clock in the evening. I worked really hard and I learned how to manage a business. I learned how to succeed and excel. I learned so much about how materials were developed and how to implement them carefully. The thing that I didn't really have a great handle on was how you engage teachers to become critical thinkers and things like that. So lo and behold, I decided to take the principal's exam in Chicago, which was also very rigorous. Mind you, I had quit my job. 1,600 people took the exam, and I was the only female outside of the system who passed the exam that year.
Oh my
And I
goodness.
just passed the exam. I didn't get any extra points for being a leader or anything like that. And people said, oh, well, you're not going to get an assignment for 5 or 6 years. I My experience at IBM, SRA, and Walt Disney Magnet School and Richard E. Byrd, people didn't know. I was still very quiet. And I never will forget, I went for an interview and Dr. Elmo said, well, the school you're applying for, there's already a principal there, but I have another school for you. And I want you to come and interview for this school. And I did. And I'll tell you, I had to quit my job and everything so I could go back and become a principal. And I was a principal for almost 10 years.
Wow.
And everything that I learned um, in the years preceding from teaching and everything, we were able to bring it to the school, and the school rocked. It was,
Oh,
the
yes.
school just rocked. These
Yes.
Black children there, they were, oh my gosh. And today I'm still in touch with a lot of those children. One of them is a Rhodes Scholars. The 2 or 3 are physicians. There were lawyers. There were just all kinds of things because I picked a staff and I went about selecting teachers to come to the school the same way we had selected teachers for Disney Magnet. I was not interested in proclaimed experience. My attitude was show me. And when I interviewed people who said they hadn't read any books, I said, I'm sorry, you can't teach here.
Right.
You can't come and teach here if you haven't read a book, if you don't know anything about music. And I selected this very empowered staff of people, and we had a full-blown orchestra. We taught Spanish and Japanese grades, kindergarten through fifth grade. Grades 5 through 8, we taught Latin. And the children were so good. They would start off a soliloquy in English, and somebody would pick it up in Latin, and then they would, just keep exchanging like that. And it was a very poor community, but because it was poor did not mean those parents didn't have dignity. Oh my goodness. And we got the Latin program because one of the mothers who was on aid-dependent children, she volunteered and she kept saying, Ecce Romani, Ecce Romani. I didn't know what Ecce Romani meant. I didn't know it was the Roman school. And I went over to the University of Chicago and we connected with them, and they helped us to write our Latin program. I went to the University of Illinois where Bill Ayers, he had come to help me work. I know he's very controversial, but we were very good friends. And I found an outstanding math and science program at those schools. And I had worked with SCIS, science, a process approach to science. That school exploded. The scores went up. We were in every magazine. We were in Time magazine. We were in all kinds of magazines. And I would leave the children to be the leaders of the school. And one time the arts critic came from what was the old Sun Times newspaper. And he was a very stern man. And I said to him, "Oh, you want to hear the children sing?" And I called some of the eighth graders and I said, get the choir together. I stayed in my office. The children took over. Kids poured out of their rooms and he cried. They were wonderful. The kids were just,
Oh
and
my
we
goodness.
had problems there. Now we had gangs and all that kind of stuff. And when I came there, there was a lot of teenage pregnancy, but we cut that stuff out. We we did all kinds of things there to make science a wonderful subject. And we found out many things that children didn't know, and we tried to address all those things. But I had great teachers and great parents. I had great teachers and parents who would go to any length to help their children succeed once they knew what to do. And to me, that's the key.
Yeah.
We don't pay attention to parents and we don't pay attention to the needs of teachers. We train people to believe in the field of education that they should know everything. That's not true. Until the day you die, there should be only two things in life that you are doing. Either you are teaching or
Or
you
learn.
are learning.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Or learning. And I don't care. And I've spoken in about 43 or 46 states in America. And I've spoken to like high powered groups of people and everything. But I don't care what you say, that there's nothing that's so important in life that if you're either teaching or you're learning, and you're learning and teaching something. Even at 84 now, I am learning and teaching. I continue to learn and teach. And I can tell that you're one of those people. Look at you doing this
You're
podcast.
so,
I think it's so
I'm so,
wonderful.
like, I'm so excited. So there's a couple of things that you talked about. One is you kept saying we threw out the curriculum, we did what was best for our kids, or we saw this opportunity, or we were across the street from the lake and we took advantage of that, or I saw Disney at the airport and knew that I wanted to take my kids to Disney because I knew they might not have that experience. That those ways of thinking outside of the box in order to address the issues that are present in schools, like our hands are almost tied now, in terms of being able to do that. Like they give us the standards, they give us the curriculum, they tell us where to stand, they tell us how much to talk, when to stop talking. Like it's so prescriptive that it almost takes away that creativity part. Well, in a lot of cases, I think it does. People leave the university like hyped about what they're going to be able to do in their career. And then you get into a school or a district and they just put you in a box. It
There are
sounds like
too
you
many.
weren't in a box, like you weren't in a box. And
No,
it feels like in order to make this better, like we got to get back out of the box and get to where people are creative problem solvers like you were. And like you were able to bring what you learned from all those schools and the companies that you worked for, you were able to bring that with you and put those things into play. You were able to design interview questions where you ask people what books they read, and that told you a lot about them. And now, like they even prescribe what we can ask during interviews. Like it's everything is so scripted that it takes away our creativity. And I feel like that's
that's
one of the
unfortunate.
places that we really need to address.
That's unfortunate. Um, I think that to some extent, teachers, and we have to become more involved in the political system, and we have to become very involved in what we know to be right for children and parents and ourselves. And we need to know each other enough to know that, and I support unions, but I think that the involvement of so many unions, so many legislatures, and so many people who know nothing about being in a classroom.
They're
Who
making the decisions for it. Yep.
they're making and a lot of parents are outstanding, but some parents are not. They need to be there and be expected to do their part.
Yeah.
um, I think we put education in a box where education as we know it now is not what I think we want or need. And I'm really disturbed by so many people who are so critical of the education system and who don't know anything about it. They
Yes.
just don't have any knowledge. You, you've got to have an open mind and an open heart, and one size does not fit all.
It never does. It never does. Okay.
No, it
All
just
right. So
doesn't.
obviously we're gonna have part two of our conversation because I have like 42 more questions to ask you. But anyway, to end this segment of our conversation, I typically end with a quote. And as I was thinking about you and the things that you told me, I was thinking she is a trailblazer. And so I was thinking, who else is a trailblazer who I could get a quote from? So of course I thought of Ketanji Brown Jackson, our Supreme Court justice, because I'm so like, she just appears to me to be somebody who has a spirit that's like yours too. So one of her quotes is, "I'm so honored to have so many people who have encouraged me, who have supported me, and who view this as a really important step for our country and for our society. It's not about me personally, in a sense. I'm embodying this progress that many people feel we're making by having me appointed to this seat. And it's pretty daunting in a lot of ways." And all those experiences that you talked to me about kind of feels like there were people who poured into you along the way. There's people who encouraged you, people who supported you, people who saw stuff in you that sometimes you didn't even see in yourself. And I'm wondering if you could tell me what about that quote kind of resonates with you, and who are those major influences, the people who've encouraged you along the years?
Well, it really, there came a point in my career when, after I quit and started to work for IBM, I became acutely aware of the fact that this was not about me, that I was there to make a way to help others, and that
Mm.
I really know the power of and understand the power of collaboration. I know the power of people coming together to dialogue. And uh, I think that not a lot of people have worked in places where they couldn't wait to get to school. And when I worked at Disney, I couldn't wait to get to school.
I
I
love
had to be there.
school.
I couldn't wait to get to school because we had a team of teachers. Some of us are still friends. We have been friends for more than 40 years, and we still carry on like crazy people. We used to do things that just, and we didn't ask permission, and we didn't get into a lot of trouble because we had some great educational leaders that believed in our craziness, and
Nice.
the kids believed in our craziness. And I'm still in touch with those young people. I have a child that came from Cabrini Green. uh, he's a world-class dentist. He's 62 years old now, and he came and spent 3 days with me. And he said, "You're not changed." He said, "You still have this joy about you that's just,
Oh,
it's an it's
infectious it is.
yes." I really do have a joy, and my pastor now, I told him, I said, the joy is jumping off the walls, just jumping off the walls. Schools need to become places where joy
Joy
jumps
is
off
jumping
the
off the
wall.
walls. That That is so perfect. So there's two other things that I want to quickly get to before we end. One is you were, and I want to congratulate you again, the May Queen at National Louis University for 1959. I saw your beautiful picture, and you talked a little bit about the fact that you got a yearbook or some book and your picture wasn't displayed. I just want you to know that when I saw that picture during our connections meeting, the amount of pride that I felt for just knowing you, being a trailblazer, being a person who was a first in so many things that you've done. I just want to congratulate you from the bottom of my own heart about what you were able to do, as after having left National Louis, and for that amazing accomplishment. In 1959, with only two people who were African American women in your dorm, you were selected as the 1959 May Queen. That's outstanding.
And, and the students voted, so it was
It's
my
outstanding.
peers.
It's so
Yeah.
cool. You had to have had that kind of personality that made that be possible. The second thing, and I'm going to come down in person and we've talked about it, is that amazing art collection you have. So just tell us like briefly about that collection, and then I'm going to try to do our second installment of the podcast in person with you so I can look at that art
My
and we
goodness.
can demonstrate it.
Oh my goodness. Well, um, my husband and I started working together to collect art. My husband was a math teacher, and he didn't know anything about art. But when I went to National, we had comparative art courses, and my family had started me on understanding lots of art around the world. You know, they were travelers. But when I came to National, it kind of came together for me. And I was able to go to Europe in 1965 with another National graduate, a Black person. She's married to Thomas Todd now in
Okay.
Chicago,
Okay.
and her name is Janice Todd. And we went to Europe for about 7 or 8 weeks, some unusual amount of time. And we just went everywhere and saw all of this great art. But I had started collecting little pieces of African art, but now I think we have maybe I would say 1,000 pieces of hand blown glass. We probably have 500 or 600 paintings.
Oh
We
yeah,
have
I'm on my
we have a
way. I'm
basket
coming down
room.
there.
I've
I
been
have got to
collecting
see that.
baskets from all over, all different kinds of cultures. The piece that I have that I love the most is a Japanese basket with silk figurines that my aunt brought to the family in the 1930s when she traveled. I was born in 1938, but this came to our family before I was born, and it's a part of my collection. I have a whole complete collection of baskets. People don't realize how important baskets are to our
Yes.
civilization. And my husband has allowed us to amass a collection that's been publicized a lot. We're very lucky. Most of our work comes from Chicago artists, WPA artists, Fred Jones. Jacob Lawrence worked in Chicago, and arguably
Love
he's
Jacob
the best.
Lawrence's work. Yes.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
I love his work. I just have a lot of work by African American artists. And when I moved to Knoxville, uh, they just didn't even understand African American art. But every child that I've ever touched, they know a lot about African American art because I made sure of that.
Yes. Yes.
I want to say to you, I love the fact that you and the new dean are at National, because when I went there, we never saw anyone of color that we could be proud of. And as a principal, I wanted somebody from National. We did have Rebecca Barr, I think was her name, and she passed away. She was a reading specialist and very, very good. She and her husband taught at the University of Chicago. They helped me a lot become the principal that I became. And I was a distinguished principal, and then I became a nationally recognized educator because of what I did in Chicago. So I've traveled the whole country and worked with both sides of the aisle to get legislation in for character development and art and all this kind of stuff. So education, I I think anybody who really loves children and who loves the knowledge and what it can do, knowledge can do anything when carefully selected and carefully used to help all people develop and grow. It's you can take your knowledge is like a talisman. You can carry it in your pocket. There's a poem that I always said by O star, the fairest one in sight, we grant your loftiness the right to some obscurity of cloud. It will not do to say of night, since dark is what brings out your light. See, children to me, when I was coming along in education, they were people talked about African American children like they were flotsam, but to me, they were the stars. Oh my gosh, they were my stars. And I could, and I used to teach poetry to these children, and I would say a line and they would pick it up and carry right on.
So beautiful.
So
So
don't tell me about my babies. I love and I think of great teachers that I've known, and I've raised some great principals. So I am so glad that you are there because I feel a spirit from you and the new dean that things are going to change. You're going to be part of the change.
thank you. Mrs. Sylvia Peters, you gonna make me cry on my own podcast, but thank you a million times for being my special 21st Urban Legends
Oh,
podcast interviewee. I'm so excited, and I'm getting my Knoxville ticket, so I have to check dates with
great,
you so I can come down and experience your
great.
art collection. I'm so excited that you had the chance to go to National Louis. I'm so excited that we had the chance to connect and have this conversation. Thank
I
you a
am
million
too.
times.
I am too. I love you. Take care. God
Love you
bless
too.
you.